In this video, we're going to take a look at a couple of what are referred to as freeform deformation modifiers. Max shortens the names when found in the modifier list to FFDs. Now, an FFD modifier allows you to deform an object by controlling the shape of a cage that surrounds the surface that it's been applied to. The way it works is the cage controls the underlying geometry. So changing the shape of the cage basically will change the shape of whatever's inside the cage. Let's take a look at how it works using a file named FFD modifier. You can find it in the Working Files folder. In selecting the object and going to the modifier list, you'll find that there's a handful of different types of freeform modifiers. The names either tell you something about the overall shape of the cage that the modifier applies to the underlying object, or with the numbered versions, account of the number of controlling lines in the cage going in a particular direction. That'll make more sense once you see one. We'll be looking at both types. Let's start with one called FFD 3x3x3. Now, the number 3 on the modifier tells you the number of wires that travel in each direction on the lattice cage. That number offering a higher or lower degree of control, all depending on the number of those lattice lines. Where the lines, or what I like to call ropes, come together, you see little knots. Those are referred to as control points, which can be accessed and controlled once you're down at the subobject level on the modifier. Over in the modifier stack, let's open up the FFD. Directly below the name, you'll see the control points. Go ahead and click on that. Why don't we see if we can reform the top of our fountain? To do that, I'll orbit my view, then select all the control points that go down the middle of the top. I'll then orbit around for more of a bird's eye view, then move those down. So the lattice cage and control points work just as advertised. Changing the shape of the cage changes the shape of what's inside the cage. Let's go ahead and undo that with the Ctrl-Z shortcut. Now, a different design to the top of the fountain could be achieved by selecting just a single middle control point on the cage and moving it down. I'll first click away to remove my selection, then click on the middle point at the top. Moving this down gives us a completely different shape for our fountain. Let's also undo that. If you, let's say, wanted to scale the entire top smaller, you could select all the control points on the top row and scale them closer together. Let's orbit to more of a side view to make our selection. I'll window directly across the top, grabbing all the control points in that area. Then I'll orbit back around for a bird's eye view. In activating the scale command, I'll fill the gold triangle in the gizmo and pull back. There's also a reset button over on the right that you can use if you want to take things back to the way it looked before making the changes. I'll click on that this time instead of undoing. Okay, why don't we take a look at the other freeform deformation type real quick. We'll first delete the modifier we have in the stack. I'll click on the FFD name, then right-click, choosing Delete. Let's go back in the modifier list, this time choosing FFD Cylinder. That's been shortened down to CYL. One of the nice things about both shape-type freeform deformers is they allow you more control over determining the number of lines in each direction. Over on the right, in a category called Dimensions, click on Set Number of Points. Here, if needed, you could customize the number of lines going in any of 3 directions. Why don't we go ahead and leave it the way it is by simply canceling out. A little further down in the controls, you have a button that's called Conform to Shape. Clicking on that will realign the lines to match up more to the shape of your object. For our example, let's go ahead and simply reset. Let's now open the modifier, getting back to the control point level. Back in the view, I'll orbit around to more of a side location, then select all the points that make up the bottom of the cage. Moving these up and down will allow me to either shorten or lengthen the bottom of the fountain. What makes the freeform deformations even more powerful is that they can be animated. If we were, for an example, creating a 3D cartoon and the wind was blowing at hurricane force, we could animate the fountain maybe swaying from side to side in an exaggerated way. Let's try something like that. Staying more in a kind of front orientation, I'll draw a window selection around both middle rows of control points. Then, to create some animated movement, I'll turn on my auto key, then head down to the timeline. Let's take our slider to frame 30 and move the control points to one side. I'll now go to 60 on the timeline, moving the control points in the opposite direction. Then finally to around frame 90, moving them back again to the other side. Let's play that back and see how it looks. So there's our cartoon fountain swaying back and forth to the hurricane force winds. That's the FFD modifiers. Whether using them as a modeling tool or a way of animating, they're both very useful and kind of fun. I'll save the file out as FFD modifier completed if you'd like to take a look.